In 1990, in Essex, England, a meeting took place that changed the lives of many people. Susan, a young woman in her late teens who was training to be a hairdresser, met Kieran Lynch. Kieran, who worked as a bricklayer and construction worker, was 3 years older than Susan. From the beginning, their relationship seemed perfect. Susan's friends noted that Kieran seemed to worship the ground she walked on. 4 years later, in 1994, Susan and Kieran were married. It was extremely important to Susan that her new husband get along well with her parents. Fortunately, this was the case. Kieran quickly hit it off with Susan's parents, especially her mother, Jennifer Cronin. This closeness between son-in-law and mother-in-law became an important part of the family dynamic. Over time, the couple had 2 daughters, Matilda and Molly. The girls were extremely close to their grandparents, Jennifer and her husband. They saw each other at least twice a week. These frequent visits strengthened family ties and created a warm, loving atmosphere for the children. Matilda, the eldest daughter, later recalled her early impressions of her father. She said that when she was little, she thought he was a generous and wonderful father. Kieran devoted all his free time to his daughters, despite his long working hours. He tried to be a model father and husband, creating an image of an ideal family. However, as it turned out later, there was another side to Kieran's personality. He had a deeply competitive nature, always striving to be the best at everything. This personality trait later manifested itself in his desperate need to control family life and maintain the image of the perfect family at all costs. Over time, Kieran's behavior began to show disturbing signs. Susan noticed that her husband was really struggling to cope with stress. It was difficult for him to express his emotions in a healthy way, and this often resulted in outbursts of anger. Kieran started destroying and breaking things during these episodes. The situation did not improve over time. On the contrary, Kieran's reactions became more intense and aggressive, especially when alcohol was involved. One of their daughters later recalled vivid memories of screaming, swearing, and broken plates. These episodes became more frequent and intense. A typical cycle of violence was evident in Kieran's behavior. The day after an outburst, he would usually apologize and try to justify his behavior. He would promise that it would never happen again, but these promises were rarely kept. Like many victims of domestic violence, Susan felt ashamed and embarrassed by the situation in her family. She did not want to tell anyone about what was happening behind the closed doors of their home. This silence only increased her isolation and vulnerability. In 2015, changes in Kieran's behavior became noticeable not only to Susan, but also to their friends. One of Susan's friends noticed that Kieran seemed withdrawn and more exhausted than before. His behavior at work had also changed. Sometimes he would not show up at construction sites where he was supposed to be working. The family's financial situation also began to cause concern. To Susan's surprise, when the bill for the credit card, which was usually only used for large purchases, came in, it turned out that Kieran had spent about £3,000 withdrawing money from various ATMs. When Susan questioned him about it, Kieran became defensive and hostile, which further increased the tension in the house. The situation became even more serious when Susan found a small straw and some cocaine in Kieran's work clothes pocket. This discovery shocked Susan and confirmed her worst fears about her husband's changing behavior. When Susan found the drugs, she sent Kieran a text message expressing her disappointment in his choice and accusing him of putting drugs before his family. Kieran did not make any excuses, but only begged her not to tell their daughters. The situation in the house became increasingly tense and dangerous. On one occasion, when the daughters were not at home, Kieran threatened Susan with a knife, putting it to her throat and threatening to kill her and himself. On another occasion, he was preparing a noose in the attic. Such terrible incidents were becoming more frequent. Susan realized that the situation could end tragically. Despite the difficulties, she could not even confide in her own mother, Jennifer, wanting to protect her from worrying. Nevertheless, Susan realized the need for decisive action. In November 2016, after 24 years of marriage, the Lynch couple agreed to divorce. Kieran decided to move out of the family home and return to live with his parents. It was a difficult decision, but Susan realized that their daughters were old enough and should not have to witness endless arguments and noise. Her main concern was their well-being. Susan was relieved when Kieran left. A friendly atmosphere finally prevailed in the house. The tension was reduced, and things began to improve gradually. For the first time in a long time, Susan felt joy. She and her daughters could talk calmly, watch movies together, laugh, and enjoy life. There was no longer a need to predict and decipher their father's mood when he returned from work. However, Susan did not realize that her ex-husband had no intention of letting her go. Despite an initially peaceful separation, Kieran began to show signs of stalking and harassment. To finally break away from Kieran and move on, Susan decided to initiate a formal divorce. She felt hesitant, knowing Kieran's unstable and unpredictable nature, but decided to send him a text message suggesting that they meet at a cafe to discuss. To her surprise, the meeting went off without a hitch. Kieran seemed to take the news of her desire to start divorce proceedings positively. They even exchanged short messages after the meeting. Kieran expressed his happiness for her new romance, and Susan expressed her hope that Kieran would also find happiness in love soon. The next day, however, the situation changed dramatically. Kieran's attitude toward the divorce changed dramatically. He began to demand £60,000 for agreeing to sign the divorce papers, claiming that he had already left her the house and all its contents. More disturbing was that he expressed a desire for her death. Kieran did not limit himself to text threats. He showed up in Susan's yard with a hammer, damaging several flower pots and garden ornaments. Susan, who was home alone with her dog at the time, immediately called the emergency services. By the time the police arrived, Kieran was gone. 2 officers entered the house, and Susan showed them the threatening messages. While they were recording her statement, Kieran returned, loudly stating his intention to confront his wife and claiming that no one could protect her. The police arrested Kieran Lynch for disturbing the peace. Even in handcuffs, he continued to insult his ex-wife. Subsequently, Kieran was charged with 3 counts of life-threatening behavior, carrying a dangerous weapon, and causing property damage. On January 29, 2018, Kieran denied all charges in a magistrate court. His trial was scheduled for March 29th, and he was granted bail with strict instructions to avoid any contact with Susan or going near her home. This decision left Susan and her daughters feeling defenseless and insecure in their own home. They were struck by the lenience of the law and questioned the commitment of the police to their safety. Despite the bail conditions, Kieran continued to violate the no-contact order. He would call Susan incessantly and even show up at her house, which greatly increased her fear for her safety. Kieran also spread false information among mutual friends, claiming that Susan's new partner, Mike, had sent him taunting messages about their love life. Kieran also began targeting his daughters' phones, knowing that they would relay everything to their mother. He sent one of his daughters what at first appeared to be a random set of letters and numbers. When she asked what it was, he told her it was Mike's car registration number. When she asked why he was sending it to her, Kieran replied, "He needs to talk to me, okay? Tell her and her boyfriend." The situation made Susan live in a state of constant alert. She was afraid to leave her children unattended because of Kieran's incessant calls, which could reach 80 times a day, and his constant threats to show up. Due to non-compliance with the bail conditions, Susan turned to the authorities again. At the same time, Kieran made a disturbing call to the emergency services, confessing to a failed suicide attempt due to lack of courage. A team consisting of psychologists and police officers was sent to talk to him. Upon arrival, Kieran assured them that he was fine, which led to a recommendation to see his family doctor. In their opinion, he did not need any further psychiatric care, and that was the end of the intervention. However, the barrage of calls and messages from Kieran did not stop. He repeatedly entered the area around the house, performing small but threatening acts to demonstrate his proximity. He had disrupted the electricity supply by breaking into the garage, tampered with the garden hose at Susan's mother's house, and sometimes hid under the windows of the house. His actions now caused fear not only among his ex-wife and daughters, but also among his elderly mother-in-law. The harassment of his ex-wife intensified, and Susan's appeals to law enforcement agencies were not successful. The police treated it as an ordinary verbal dispute between former partners and dismissed the woman's complaints every time. They would come, record testimony, and promise to make an arrest, but nothing happened. The authorities treated the situation as a standard domestic dispute between former partners and did not recognize the seriousness of the circumstances. This was especially true given the fact that the children were adults and, according to detectives, Lynch was not considered a threat. However, the situation deteriorated when Kieran contacted his eldest daughter, threatening her with sexual abuse. Susan was shocked to learn of this. Police launched a search for Lynch at his address in Chooksey Road in Canvey, but officers did not find him there. Women were advised to seek shelter with friends or relatives to avoid being in the house alone. Matilda went to a friend's house, and the eldest daughter went to Jennifer's grandmother, who had been living alone since her husband's death. Jennifer and her granddaughter spent the evening watching TV, drinking tea and talking, forgetting for a while about Kieran and his threatening behavior. However, as soon as they turned off the lights and went to bed, the phone started ringing. When Jennifer answered, there was silence on the line. She thought it was a false call, but the phone kept ringing again and again. Both Susan and Molly could not sleep because of these disturbing calls. Molly felt that someone was hiding in the garden. A silhouette seemed to be visible against the darkness outside the window. They barricaded themselves in the bathroom with Jennifer and called the police. It was around 2 a.m. At the same time, Susan's phone was bombarded with calls and messages, prompting her to contact the police as well. Unfortunately, due to limited law enforcement resources, constant surveillance of the stalker was not possible. They were advised to turn off their cell phones and make sure all entrances were securely locked. The police had been called 6 times in the previous 24 hours. However, despite the threats, the police stated that they did not have the manpower to send a patrol. On March 13, 2018 in the morning, one of the couple's daughters woke up to a text message from her father, Cronin. It read, "I love you no matter what they say. I kiss you." She did not reply. That morning, the police reviewed the case and downgraded the risk level from high to medium. Medium risk means that there may still be a risk of serious harm, but it may not be imminent. Jennifer had locked herself in her bedroom out of fear of Kieran. Her granddaughter, who had spent the night with her, had left the house, and Susan knew she needed to go to her mother's. She went in and locked the door behind her. Susan encouraged the mother to go on with her day, insisting that she would not allow her or her family to be intimidated by a man who simply could not accept that their relationship was over. Jennifer and her dog went out into the garden, and Susan watched them through the window as she made a cup of tea. Susan called Kieran's boss to see if he knew where he was. He did not. She then received a call from the police regarding their investigation. Suddenly, without warning, Kieran showed up at 10:48 a.m. Susan immediately called the emergency services. Kieran was running with a knife, screaming and swearing, being aggressive as he approached Jennifer. His hand was engulfed in flames. He was also carrying a gasoline can. He poured the liquid on Jennifer's head, face, and back. Jennifer squirmed and screamed as he continued to pour the liquid on her. Susan ran down the street, screaming for help. When she reached the end of the street, she turned around and noticed that he was not behind her. That's when 2 neighbors came out and told her, "Don't go there. There are 2 burned bodies." Kieran doused himself and Jennifer with fuel and then set them on fire. Susan immediately ran back to the house. She saw that her mother had no eyebrows, no eyelashes, and all her hair was burned. Her hands were red and raw. Her face was black. Despite the horrific injuries, Jennifer was able to speak, telling her daughter how much she loved her and that she and her grandchildren were her world. Susan later said that her mother told her that she was not going anywhere and that she would be fine. Kieran was also seriously injured, suffering extensive burns all over his body. He was leaning against a wall in the garden. Susan described him as red and damp and having difficulty breathing. She said she screamed at him about what he had done to her and the girls. Police, fire, and ambulance services quickly arrived at the scene, along with an air ambulance that landed at a local golf course. Kieran was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder and was taken to the hospital with Jennifer. It was later discovered that Kieran had bought a bucket and a jerry can before going to a gas station to buy fuel. 2 hours after the attack, Susan was taken in for questioning. At the hospital, the staff told Susan that Kieran would not survive the night due to the severity of his injuries. Burns covered 97% of his body. For Kieran's daughters, this was an absolutely impossible situation. One of the daughters said he was still her father, and she wanted to be able to say goodbye to him. to tell him that she loved him and that she was sorry it had come to this. Kieran Lynch died that evening. A toxicology report showed that he had alcohol and cocaine in his system. Jennifer Cronin was taken to the Broomfield Hospital burn unit, where she was admitted to the intensive care unit. With burns over 33% of her body, mostly on her upper torso and head, her condition was critical. She was admitted for surgery, but reconstruction was not possible due to the nature and extent of her injuries. It was decided to provide her with palliative care. Jennifer held on for 17 days. Tragically, on March 30th, 2018 at 13:32, Jennifer Cronin died, surrounded by her family. Dr. Benjamin Swift performed an autopsy at the hospital, confirming that the cause of death was complications from the horrific burns she had suffered. For Susan, this was deliberately done by Kieran solely to hurt her, knowing how close she and Jennifer were and how much they meant to each other. On January 21st, 2019, a week-long inquest began in Chelmsford to find out whether any state failures contributed to the deaths of 50-year-old Kieran Lynch and 72-year-old Jennifer Cronin. Susan said that when she went to the inquest, she was just angry at Kieran for what he had done. But as the facts came out about how badly the police had handled her case, she became more angry at them. Susan's partner, Mike, also described the stress and anxiety caused by Kieran's behavior. It was constant, a lot of verbal abuse, my name being dragged into things. It was getting more and more stressful. It was scary because we knew about his mental state. We didn't know what he was capable of, he said. The inquest jury concluded that Jennifer was unlawfully killed and Kieran died as a result of suicide. It also found that poor communication by the police played a role in this. Susan issued a statement saying, "We are very pleased with the results. It's been a terrible year. We've been pushed from pillar to post and we felt all along that we weren't being listened to and that things weren't being done the way they should be. And now this result means we can see it in black and white. We tried our best to get the police to pay attention, but we couldn't understand why nothing was being done. I hope the police have learned from these mistakes. It doesn't bring my mom or their father back, but things definitely need to be reconsidered. They are supposed to protect and serve the public, and they definitely didn't do that for us." For Susan, the police's failures to act on concerns about Kieran meant that this was preventable. "The police didn't protect us. We screamed and shouted and waved it in their faces, and the failings were shocking. If they had done their job properly, my mom would be here," she said. The investigation found 5 areas of police deficiencies that were contributing factors to Jennifer's death, and attempts to arrest him were not made in a timely and effective manner. Following the investigation's findings, several officers received management actions and training on record-keeping and information handling. No police officers were disciplined. In March 2019, the Independent Office for Police Conduct found that no affirmative action had been taken by officers and that there was a lack of clarity on domestic violence offenses. A domestic homicide review was also set up, and the police were criticized for failing to identify Kieran as a danger he posed or that his behavior amounted to stalking. It also cited a lack of proactive responses to bail breaches and a lack of clarity about which officers should be held accountable. It was later announced that Susan was suing the police in the hope that they would accept legal responsibility for their failings in dealing with her. She said, "I would just like to see the police take proper responsibility. I strongly believe that this could have been prevented if the police had done their job properly. I went through hell and it was just not taken seriously. I was left as a single mother with no help and no family. It's not easy. I am outraged at the shortcomings of the police, to be honest." Detective Superintendent Stephen Jennings said, "I met with Susan Lynch and apologized to her for what happened in 2018. I personally invited her to come and speak to our new teams. We are a much stronger service than we were 5 years ago in every way." Mike said Susan often suffers from flashbacks and wakes up screaming and crying. The absolute horror of what Susan and her family have been through is almost impossible to put into words, and the horrific series of events that unfolded before her eyes is too horrific to comprehend. Susan said, "Watching my mother burn alive at the hands of my ex-husband and being helpless to intervene was extremely disturbing. She did not deserve such a painful and traumatic death. Mom still had many years to live and much love to give to her grandchildren. My poor girls have to live with this forever. Fortunately, They have wonderful memories of the kind of man their father once was. This case has left a trail of devastation and destruction that is simply impossible to comprehend. Jennifer Cronin should still be here, enjoying life and spending time with those she loved most. Her life ended in a way that is too horrific to even think about. And for those left behind, life will never, ever be the same. When we lose someone we love, we have to hold on to those good memories and keep those happy times close to our hearts, and hope that with the passage of time, there will be an opportunity for healing. This story emphasizes the importance of taking domestic violence and stalking seriously, and the need for law enforcement to respond effectively to such situations. It also shows how quickly the situation can deteriorate if proper action is not taken.